Today, we're going to get into a really powerful story. It's about what a nation decides to forget and what a community simply cannot let go of. This is a story about national silence and personal memory, all based on the writings of two former Bhutanese refugees, Ramesh and Khem Gautam. And it all kicks off with one pretty chilling question.
Okay, so imagine this. You've written a book of poems. Nothing political, just poetry. You offer to send a couple of copies to your relative back home in Bhutan, and this is the response you get back. Do you wish to strip me of my job? That's a real story. It happened to the authors. You see, his relative wasn't afraid of the poems themselves. He was afraid of the connection, of what it would mean to be associated with someone who had left.
And that really is the heart of the matter, isn't it? That's the central question we're going to unpack here. What is going on in Bhutan that a simple book of poems from a family member could make someone fear for their job? Well, the answer is buried in a piece of Bhutan's history that has been very actively and very systematically silenced.
To really understand that fear, we have to rewind the clock. We have to look at an event that's almost completely missing from Bhutan's official story, a massive exodus of its own people back in the early 1990s.
Just look at that number, over 80,000 people. These were the Lhotshampa, who are Nepali-speaking Bhutanese citizens. They left the country. At the time, Amnesty International actually called it one of the largest ethnic expulsions in modern history. And yet, if you go to Bhutan today, this huge event is just shrouded in silence.
And for the Lhotshampa community, this journey was just incredibly painful, stretching on for decades. It really started in the 1980s when new policies were brought in that discriminated against their culture, their language. Things escalated, and that led to the mass exodus in the early 90s. From there, many spent decades, literally decades, in refugee camps in Nepal. And today, they've been resettled all over the world, everywhere from the US to Norway, creating this global Bhutanese diaspora.
So the big question is, why? Why is this massive piece of history so unknown inside Bhutan? Well, a researcher named Lynn Christensen, who did some really rare fieldwork inside the country, she found something fascinating. This silence isn't just people forgetting over time. No, it's an active, powerful force that literally shapes how the entire nation sees itself.
And when I say active, I mean it's a total erasure. This history, it's not taught in schools. You won't find it in the national museums. It's not discussed in the media. The only place this story still exists is in private, in whispers between family members. And even then, the stories are often fractured and incomplete.
So what happens when you have this official silence? Well, it creates a vacuum. With no official history to go on, younger Bhutanese, most of whom were born after the Exodus, they've had to piece things together from family stories, from rumors, from little hints. And what you end up with are four totally distinct and often conflicting versions of the truth.
This has led to this deep split in how people understand their own country. You have some young people who have just literally never heard of the conflict. It's a total blind spot. Then you have those who believe the state's story, that the people who left were Ngolips, basically anti-nationals. Lhotshampa youth, on the other hand, they see it very differently, as a clear result of discrimination. And then there's this fourth group, trying to find a middle path, a sort of no-blaming narrative to just keep the peace.
Okay, let's zoom in on that word, Ngolop, because it's so important. This term is the key. It completely reframes the whole issue. It takes what was a citizens' rights problem and turns it into a national security threat. By labeling people who protested or left as anti-nationals, the story becomes one where the state was just defending itself, not one where it was dealing with its own unhappy citizens.
And here's the crucial takeaway. This silence, it doesn't create unity, not at all. It actually creates these deep fractures in society. First, there's a rift between citizens and the state. I mean, when people know something big happened but they're not allowed to talk about it, trust just evaporates and self-censorship kicks in. But second, it creates a rift between citizens themselves. You have people living in completely different realities, totally unable to understand each other because they don't even share a common history.
All right, so now let's flip the coin. Let's shift our perspective to those living outside Bhutan. For this diaspora community, the struggle is totally different. It's not about silence. It's about trying to piece together a coherent story and a sense of who you are after being scattered all across the globe.
See, back in the refugee camps, there was this strong, shared story of injustice that really united everybody. But now, with resettlement in different countries, that one single narrative has started to fracture. It's become this collection of individual memories, old grudges, and for a lot of people, just the overwhelming need to build a new life and move forward.
And this search for belonging, it's really complicated. Some are trying to build this non-resident Bhutanese identity. Others are connecting with their ethnic roots through Nepali networks. But even that's tough, because they remember that back in the camps, they were often seen as outsiders, not really as true Nepalis. And on top of all that, there are some uncomfortable truths within their own community that they're still struggling to face.
And this is where the authors make such a powerful point. They say that to build a strong identity for the future, the community has to be willing to look at its own difficult internal histories. They mention an event called the Gargandana incident. It's clearly a point of conflict within the community itself. And their point is, ignoring these internal cracks doesn't make you stronger, it just weakens you in the long run.
So you might be thinking, okay, this all happened 30 years ago. Why does it still matter so much? Well, because this isn't really about the past. It's about how memory, or the lack of it, is actively shaping the future.
This right here is the key idea. Remembering is not a passive thing you do. It is a form of political power. Holding on to a story, keeping it alive, refusing to let it be erased, that can unfreeze political situations that have been stuck for decades. It's a long game, for sure, but it's an incredibly powerful one.
And you can see this playing out all over the world. The Armenian diaspora fought for a century to get the genocide recognized because they refused to forget. In Australia, public acknowledgement of the injustices against Indigenous peoples only happened after generations of advocacy. And you see the influence of diasporas everywhere, like how a child of refugees expelled from Uganda eventually became the mayor of New York City. Influence can come from the most unexpected places, but only if the story is kept alive.
And that brings us to the end, right here, with the central dilemma. For Bhutan and for the diaspora community, this is the question that remains. What's the right balance? Can a nation really find true harmony by burying its past? Or is historical honesty, no matter how painful, the only real path forward to a truly unified future? It's a question with no easy answer, and it's one that's going to define the next chapter for all Bhutanese, no matter where they call home.